Okay, so welcome. My name is George, and I'm an advanced Cicerone and national BJCP judge. And I'm going to taste this beer today called Diesel Boy from a brewery called Alder in Italy. It's an American lager. And I've been wanting to do these for a while. The truth is, I've made a few of these videos, and they probably won't ever get published. We'll see how that goes. We'll see if this one gets published. So my goal with these videos is to do reviews kind of for myself so that I can try certain beers and have some form of like documenting things that I'm tasting. But then also to share that with people who are studying for BJCP or for Cicerone and who would like to sort of join me or just kind of observe the tasting process. So and then also just kind of an excuse to buy cool beers. So I'm gonna crack this one open and do the hard pour. I can already smell, just as I'm pouring, some kind of sulfur type, yeast characteristics. Nothing wrong, especially for the style. Ooh, apologies for this dirty glass here. So also from here, getting some light malty, like bready, honey, like raw dough, and also a touch of sort of floral, spicy, like jasmine or like honeysuckle. Bring it a little closer. The sulfur and yeast character are still kind of not like dominant, because everything so far is pretty mellow, but let's take this through the grid, so to speak. So for aroma, the thing that steps out to me the most is, again, this, it's actually pretty balanced, but the thing I'm going to comment most or first on is the yeast profile. So for yeast, I get a light pear, light apple. Overall, I would say the yeast intensity on the aroma is low. But there's also that sulfur, not, I don't want to use the word like rotten egg, but that's kind of where it would go. A little sulfur, like rotten egg, even like a little bit of like a struck match, or so we call sulfitic. And so that's kind of my overall yeast. We'll see if something kind of pops up later on in the tasting. For my malt, I'm going to say this is low malt intensity, honey, breadcrumb, graham cracker, like those honey graham candies. So it's basically a graham cracker covered in honey, shaped like a little koala, was it? And then dinner roll, raw grain, get kind of like dry chaparral, like walking through a dry, like a hike somewhere. And for hop profile, I'm going to say this is low also. The hop profile has a little bit more intensity than the malt profile, but still low. And getting sort of fresh cut grass, getting a little bit of citrus. And the citrus to me is like mandarin orange, mostly kind of orange zest. And again, that I mentioned earlier, kind of floral herbal quality. So I've covered my malt, yeast, hops, and then I'm looking for other. And I know there's no coffee or anything like that in here, so there we go. Then I'm going to go to flavor, and then we'll come back to appearance. First sip is just kind of swishing it around. Let it kind of take over the palate. Second sip, going to do a little slurp. And then for this third sip, I'm going to make sure I'm breathing out my nose right after I swallow so that I can take advantage of the olfactory bulb. So in terms of flavor, the balance that I was getting or noting on the aroma is pretty identical. I get, the finish is starting to come in too, so trying to like keep it all organized. So malt intensity, we'll say low, honey, toast, crust, dinner roll, raw dough, still this kind of open field or dry straw sort of characteristic. The bitterness is actually like a medium plus. So I'll kind of go into our hop characteristics here. So hops, overall flavor for hops, we're going to say medium plus. That bitterness is kind of driving the show there. So call that, if someone told me medium, I'd be happy. Low, I'd say no, it needs more, but I'll stick with medium. Let me think here. Medium plus. And then hop flavor, definitely a lot of like fresh cut grass, very green, like green leaves, forest, with a touch of this like orange rind. So before I was on the Aroma getting a lot of like mandarin orange, like zest, and now I'm getting more of that kind of pithy rind, and I think that's influenced by the bitterness level there. And then for the yeast, there's still some of this kind of low pear, low apple, and that low sulfur, still very much in the range of what I would expect for drinking an American lager. So overall, it's actually kind of pleasant. It makes it feel a little fresh. Balance, this is a key part, I think, of identifying any beer style. I'd say the balance is decidedly bitter. So the balance is decidedly malt forward. For a beer like American lager, you can go either way. You can go malt, you can go hop in terms of the balance. But typically we want them to be, we would describe the style, or the most classic examples at least, we would describe as being very balanced. So it's okay if the malt's a little higher, it's okay if the hop's a little higher. Here I would say the bitterness being where it's at. I described my malt in like the medium territory, or I actually would describe this malt in the low territory if I'm kind of correcting myself. And the bitterness was in that medium to medium plus territory. So not quite as balanced as you would typically expect for an American lager, or at least for the classic examples that we use for reference. And so when I'm talking about like lingering aftertaste or finish, the finish is, let me go back to that. But in terms of flavor, lingering flavors, the bitterness is definitely what kind of dominates that balance. So I'm going to think hard about where the sweetness is here, or where the finish is, because I know my bitterness is pretty high. So I want to try to detect what exactly is the finish level. So how much residual sugar is left here. So the perception at least is that it's a very dry finishing, that is definitely being enhanced by the level of bitterness there. But I do detect some sweet flavor in there. So that's telling me that if I have that much bitterness, I'm still detecting some sweet flavor. The sweetness is probably about, I would end up writing probably off dry. But definitely with that bitterness there to kind of clean it out. So for flavor, we've touched on malt, hops, yeast. There's no other to discuss here. We talked about balance, which is key. That's hop forward. And we talked about that finish, or that sort of like aftertaste. And now we move into the mouthfeel. So I like to take another swig. As I swish, I'm trying to see like how much is the carbonation sort of exploding in my, on the palate. And not a lot, but definitely turns to bubbles as I swish. So for me, I'll say, carbonation's medium. Medium plus I think is acceptable as well. Astringency I would say is actually medium plus, which for the style, I think we'll talk about that. But if I was grading this, I would end up taking some points off at least, regardless of how I feel about the beer. But so for astringency, medium plus, carbonation, medium to medium plus, which is breaking my rule of usually just trying to pick a spot. And then alcohol, I'd say there is a very slight alcohol warmth. I do think that the bitterness is kind of enhancing that perception at least, but to me at least the perceived alcohol warmth is low. And creaminess is low. And that will kind of wrap up our mouthfeel. So then for overall, this is where, if I'm judging this beer, so far it's really just trying to make observations. I have shared a few little things about Lego for the style, this or that. But I try to reserve my opinions about the beer until I've done the process of kind of outlining what the beer actually is. So really, what are my malt, hops, yeast, and the intensities and descriptions like we've done. So if I'm going to the overall, I like to write this kind of one-liner elevator pitch, or I'll say like menu description for the beer. I would say a hop forward, easy drinking, slightly malty lager. Kind of generic, but that just kind of gets the description out there. And then that I can use to go back to the BJCP style guidelines and say, okay, does this really fit that description? And if I need more depth, then I'll go into like the flavor and the aroma and the mouthfeel descriptions, all those sort of things. In this case, I think this beer is just too bitter for, to be considered a classic American lager. I don't think that really matters. When we're talking about just, is this a great beer and would I recommend it? Absolutely. This is actually a pretty amazing beer, which is really the point. But I would probably want to push this maybe into like American Blonde. It still might be too bitter for that. You could probably put this into American Pale Ale. It does have the supporting malt character actually, even though it's absent of any like caramel or anything like that, but that's typical these days as well. So I don't know if I would ding it there. I also know that, at least from the ingredients, they don't include corn or rice, and that's fine. But I've noticed a little trend just a couple times, I've made maybe a couple of observations that here in Europe, I'm noticing that people are kind of proud when they make an American lager and they don't use rice or corn. I don't know if that's how they feel about it. I should also note that Brewer of the Year, 2016, 2018, 2022, amazing brewery. If you can try any of these beers, absolutely fantastic. From everything else I've had from them, I would say way more on style. This one I would say is a little off style, but fantastic, killer. So if you're actually looking for an amazing, it's almost like an amazing like American Pale Ale, I would say this, an old school where like the bitterness can still shine. It is lacking the pine and the heavy citrus like we want from American Pale Ale, but I think it scratches the I want something bitter and hoppy itch for sure. But I do have a Bock from them that I'll be trying. We'll see if I do that on camera or not. But everything else I've had from them has been like incredible. So if you can get your hands on it, I definitely recommend trying it. And so the one thing I missed was just talking about the color or the appearance. So not completely clear, but I'd say clarity is good, not brilliant. Like I don't think I could read a newspaper through it. Light straw or like light yellow. Head is persistent, and we have a kind of bone white persistent head with pretty consistent bubbles all across, small tight bubbles, a few medium small bubbles or variation in the bubble there. Lacing's pretty persistent. Overall very beautiful beer. But that is Diesel Boy American Lager from Alder. Really cool brewery from Italy. Highly recommend checking them out. And I actually feel pretty good about this one. So we'll see. We'll get this one published. Like I said, this has been something I've been trying to do for a while to get myself to do, but I get extremely camera shy every time I start. But I want to do this for my kind of consistent research and logging my research, but then also hopefully it's something that's kind of useful for other people who are trying to study for any exams or just check out some cool beers. And if there's any styles or comparisons or specific examples you want me to check out, then let me know. I definitely do want to do some kind of nerdy stuff and also talk about any sort of topics or other stuff other than just tasting. So if there's anything you want me to cover, let me know and I'll do that. And thanks for checking this out. I'm going to enjoy the rest of this beer a lot. It's fantastic, and I hope you enjoy. Cheers.